Really understanding Lee. Now that we can look in, what do we see? How can we all heal and fix this together? A NITT iFramework Family Understanding series, written by Coach Jackie, with love to everyone who loves Lee. Before we go into any of this, I need to say something clearly. Lee is not broken. Lee is not the villain of this story. Lee is not difficult, cold, indifferent, or incapable of love. Lee is a man who was shaped deeply, neurologically, spiritually, by experiences that nobody in his family fully understood at the time. And the patterns that developed from those experiences have been running quietly, largely unseen, affecting everyone who loves him and everyone he loves. Understanding Lee is not an exercise in making excuses for him, it is an act of love, because you cannot help someone find their way out of a wound you have never fully looked at. This document is for his family, for Gina, for his parents, for his siblings, for everyone who has ever been confused by him, frustrated by him, worried about him, or who has simply loved him and not known what to do with the parts of him that shut down and go silent. What follows is the most complete picture possible, neurobiological, psychological, physiological, spiritual, and cultural, of what happened to Lee, what it produced, and what all of you can do together to begin the healing. This is not about fixing Lee alone. It is about a family that heals together because the wound was made together, even if unintentionally. Let us begin with love and with honesty, both at the same time. Chapter 1: The Origin Story. What happened to Lee in the beginning? Everything that Lee is today, the silence, the cocoon, the inability to communicate timelines, the way he reads criticism as rejection, the disappearing act, none of it started with him as an adult. It started in childhood, in the family system, in the ordinary, unremarkable, unintentional ways that a child learns what the world is like and what his place in it is. The unlistened to child. When a child reaches toward a caregiver, emotionally, physically, verbally, and that reach is consistently not met, something very specific happens in the developing brain. The child does not simply feel sad. The child's brain begins to reorganize itself around the learned reality that reaching produces nothing, that expression is futile, that the inside world is private by necessity, not choice. This does not require deliberate cruelty. It does not require abuse. It happens through distraction, through being too busy, through a family culture where big feelings were not discussed, through fathers who showed love through provision and not through words, through a household where crises and car repairs and financial stress took up the oxygen in the room, and a quiet boy sat in the corner and learned to be very good at not needing anything. The neuroscience. Developmental neuroscientist Alan Shaw's research on right brain to right brain communication shows that emotional attunement between caregiver and child is not a luxury. It is the mechanism through which the developing brain literally builds its capacity for emotional regulation. When attunement is absent or inconsistent, the right hemisphere of the brain, which processes emotional experience and social connection, develops differently. The child learns to suppress rather than express. Lee was not dramatically abandoned. He was quietly overlooked. And quiet overlooking is in some ways more confusing to a developing nervous system because there is no clear event to point to, just a persistent absence where attunement should have been. The invisible son. In many African family systems, and in many large families of any culture, attention is allocated by urgency and volume. The child who cries loudest gets held. The child who breaks down gets the conversation. The child who causes the crisis gets the energy, and the child who sits quietly and manages himself gets a nod and the assumption that he is fine. Lee was the quiet one, the one who got himself busy, the one who found other things to do because the emotional airwaves were occupied. not because he did not need connection, because he learned, faster than most children should have to, that his need for connection was not going to be consistently answered. And a child who learns that does something very intelligent and very damaging at the same time. He stops reaching. Stopping the reach is not giving up. In the nervous system of a child, it is self-preservation. It is the brain protecting itself from the repeated experience of reaching and receiving nothing. The spiritual dimension. In many African spiritual and cultural traditions, the child who is quiet is the child who is assumed to be blessed. The one who does not demand is praised for being mature, for being easy, for being good. What these traditions did not account for is that the quiet child may be quiet because he has already learned that his voice does not produce a response. What looks like spiritual peace may be spiritual retreat. The tradition of not questioning one's elders while rooted in deep respect can also mean that a child's interior suffering goes unnamed and therefore unaddressed for an entire lifetime. Chapter 2. The Neurobiology of Lee. What is actually happening inside his brain and body? This is where we go deep into the science, not to turn Lee into a clinical case study, but because understanding what is happening neurologically is what allows the family to stop taking the behavior personally and start understanding it accurately. Lee is not choosing to be this way. His nervous system was shaped by years of specific inputs, and it is running the program it was given. Understanding the program is the first step to changing it. The vagus nerve and Lee's 3 states. Inside every human body runs the vagus nerve, the longest nerve in the body, stretching from the brainstem through the heart, lungs, and gut. It is the primary cable of the autonomic nervous system, and it governs how we respond to the world emotionally and physically. Stephen Porges, the neuroscientist who developed polyvagal theory, discovered that this nerve does not produce 2 states, it produces 3. State 1, ventral vagal, safe and connected. This is Lee at his best. Lee in Dubai when Gina showed up for him in his darkest hour. Lee fixing a car in the yard with his brother. Lee when he feels genuinely safe, when he is not being evaluated, when love is unconditional and there is no performance required. In this state, his face is animated, his voice is warm, he is present and accessible. He can be playful, thoughtful, engaged. This is the Lee everyone fell in love with. He is still in there. He just needs the right conditions to stay there. State 2, sympathetic activation, fight or flight. This is Lee when he feels criticized, pressured, or evaluated. The nervous system detects threat, even when no actual threat is present. Cortisol and adrenaline flood the system. The prefrontal cortex, which handles rational thought and communication, partially goes offline. The body prepares for combat or escape. Lee rarely fights, he escapes. This looks like changing the subject, giving short answers, becoming vague about plans, going quiet mid-conversation, or leaving the room emotionally, even if he is still physically present. From the outside, this looks like he does not care. From the inside, his nervous system is in survival mode. State 3, dorsal vagal, freeze and shut down. This is the incognito Lee, the one who disappears for days, the one who cannot articulate the plan, not because he does not have thoughts about it, but because his nervous system has shut down the communication pathways entirely. Dorsal vagal shutdown is the oldest, most primitive survival response in the body. It is what prey animals do when they cannot fight or flee. They go still, they go inside, they wait for the threat to pass. The family experiences Lee's shutdown as indifference. His nervous system is experiencing it as survival. Both are real. Neither is the full picture. The neuroscience, polyvagal theory, explains that the dorsal vagal shutdown state is not a conscious choice. It is a bottom-up neurological response, meaning it bypasses conscious decision-making entirely. The body moves into shutdown before the conscious mind can intervene. This is why telling Lee to just communicate does not work. The communication pathways are genuinely offline when he is in this state. The only route back is through safety, not pressure. The amygdala hijack and rejection sensitivity. Lee's amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, has been conditioned through years of emotional dismissal to be exquisitely sensitive to signals of rejection. Every time as a child that he expressed something and it was not met, his amygdala filed that experience under. Reaching equals danger. Vulnerability equals rejection. Needing people equals pain. Now, as an adult, every time someone he loves raises a concern, makes a request, or expresses disappointment, even with love, even reasonably, his amygdala fires. Not because the complaint is unfair, because the emotional signature of disappointment is identical to his amygdala's oldest, deepest catalogue entry. Not enough, not heard, going to be left. What Gina experiences as a reasonable request for a timeline, Lee's amygdala processes as, she is disappointed in me, I have failed, I am about to be rejected, shut it all down now. The neuroscience. The amygdala hijack occurs when the amygdala's threat response overrides prefrontal cortex function. In people with early dismissal trauma, the threshold for amygdala activation is significantly lower than average because the nervous system was conditioned early to perceive emotional demand as threat. Lee's shutdown is not a character deficiency, it is a hair-trigger nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do, what chronic stress has done to his body. Lee has been carrying an unacknowledged emotional load for years. The chronic low-level activation of the threat system takes a specific and measurable toll on the body. Cortisol stays elevated. The immune system is suppressed. Sleep quality degrades. The gut-brain axis is disrupted. Energy is chronically lower than it should be. A man who learned as a child that he could not express his emotional world did not stop having an emotional world. He just stopped having anywhere to put it, and what has nowhere to go goes into the body, why he cannot give the plan. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for future planning, communication, and the integration of emotional experience into coherent language. It is also the first region to go partially offline when the threat system activates. This means that when Lee is in any degree of sympathetic activation or dorsal shutdown, his ability to think clearly about the future, articulate it verbally, and communicate it to another person is genuinely impaired, not strategically, biologically. He is not withholding the plan to maintain control. He is frequently in a neurological state where the planning and communication functions of his brain are operating below capacity. The pressure to produce a plan in that state produces more shutdown, not more communication. Chapter 3, Black Tax and the Provider, Wound, the Weight Nobody Named. Lee's story cannot be understood without understanding the specific cultural and financial pressure he is carrying as the family member who made it to America. This is not background detail. This is a central load-bearing piece of why he goes quiet, why the plan stays vague, and why his nervous system is in a near-permanent state of low-level overwhelm. What black tax actually is. Black tax is the specific financial and emotional burden that falls on the member of a Black or immigrant family who achieves financial stability or geographic access. It is not simply about sending money home. It is about carrying the financial and emotional weight of an entire family system on a salary that was built for one person. Lee is living in America. He is the bridge. He is expected to sustain his household in Kenya, contribute to his family of origin, provide for Gina across the distance, build toward the visa process, and maintain his American life simultaneously. That is not a financial burden. That is a system of expectations that would stress any nervous system regardless of baseline health. Think about what Lee is managing simultaneously, sustaining a household in Kenya, contributing financially to his family of origin when called upon, navigating the American immigration system, which is expensive, slow, and emotionally exhausting, maintaining his own housing and survival costs in the United States, building savings for the visa process, the flights, the legal fees, managing the guilt of being away, managing the guilt of not always having enough, managing the shame of a wife who has been waiting for 6 years and a plan that keeps shifting. Every single one of these pressures activates the threat system, and the threat system shuts down the communication pathways. And then Gina asks for the plan. The neuroscience. Financial stress is not just emotionally difficult, it is neurologically impairing. Research published in Science demonstrated that financial scarcity creates a cognitive bandwidth tax. People operating under financial stress show measurable reductions in IQ and decision-making capacity, equivalent to missing an entire night of sleep. Lee's difficulty producing a clear communicated plan is not laziness or indifference. It is a man whose cognitive bandwidth is partially consumed by financial survival. The spiritual dimension. In the African spiritual and cultural framework, a man who cannot provide is a man who has failed his primary God-given role. This is not a stated belief. It is a deeply held, often unconscious cultural theology. Lee does not need to articulate this belief for it to be running in the background of every interaction where he is asked about the plan. Every question about when Gina is coming is, in his nervous system, an evaluation of whether he is man enough, husband enough, provider enough, and the answer he is sitting with privately is not yet, not quite, almost, and almost in the black tax framework means the shame is still running. The shame spiral and why it produces more silence. Here is the loop Lee is caught in, and that nobody in his family has fully seen. He knows the wait is too long. He knows Gina deserves a timeline. He knows the communication is inadequate. He feels shame about all of it, and shame, unlike guilt, does not motivate correction. Shame produces hiding. Guilt says, I did something wrong and I can fix it. Shame says, I am something wrong and fixing it would expose how broken I am. So instead of communicating imperfectly and moving forward, Lee goes into the cocoon, where the shame is private, where nobody can see the gap between who he is supposed to be and where he actually is. The neuroscience. Every time the family pushes harder for the plan, or expresses disappointment in the timeline, or communicates frustration at the silence, it adds another layer of shame to the spiral. And more shame produces more hiding. The family's reasonable frustration is accidentally deepening the exact wound they are trying to address. Shame researcher Brené Brown's extensive work documents that shame thrives in secrecy, silence, and judgment. The antidote to shame is not pressure, it is empathy. Chapter 4, The Spiritual Anatomy of Lee. What is happening at the level of soul? Neuroscience explains the mechanism, but the wound in Lee is not only neurological, it is spiritual. And for a family that carries faith, the spiritual dimension of this healing is not secondary, it is essential. A man who was not witnessed. In many African spiritual traditions, a person's identity is constituted through being witnessed by the community. Ubuntu, I am because we are, is not just a philosophical concept. It is a description of how the self is formed through relational recognition. A child who is not witnessed, not heard, not seen in his emotional truth does not simply feel lonely. He is spiritually incomplete in the sense that his full self has never been confirmed by the people around him. Lee carries the wound of the unwitnessed self. He exists in the family as a function, the one who fixes things, the one who provides, the one who went to America, but he has rarely existed in the family as a person whose inner life was invited and received. The spiritual dimension. In Luo spiritual tradition, there is a deep understanding that words spoken over a person or withheld from a person carry power. The child who was never told, I hear you, I see you, what you feel matters, what you think is important to me. That child grows into an adult who does not believe those things about himself, not because he was told otherwise, because the confirmation never came. The spiritual work of healing Lee is, in part, the work of speaking those words now. deliberately, repeatedly, until the nervous system begins to believe what the soul has needed to hear for decades. The father wound. The specific shape of Lee's wound follows what many spiritual traditions and psychologists call the father wound. The particular damage that comes from a relationship with a father who was physically present but emotionally unavailable, who expressed love through doing rather than through being. Fathers who fix cars, who pay school fees, who show up in the practical sense, but who never sat with their son and said, "Tell me what is in your heart. I am here. I am listening." This is not a criticism of his father. It is a pattern that was handed down from his father's father and his father's father before that. Men in many African traditions were not raised to hold emotional space. They were raised to provide, protect, and produce. And so generations of boys grew up with fathers who loved them fiercely and showed it through everything except the one thing those boys most needed: emotional presence. The spiritual dimension, the unhealed father wound, affects not only how a man receives love, it affects how he gives it. Lee became a father without ever having been fathered in the emotional sense. He is now replicating, not out of cruelty, but out of the only map he was given, a version of fatherhood and partnership that looks like provision and silence. The healing of the father wound in Lee is simultaneously the healing of the father Lee is becoming. What he receives now, he will be able to give. The spiritual significance of the cocoon. The cocoon is not only a psychological defense, it is a spiritual retreat. When Lee goes incognito, he is going to the only place in his life where he has ever felt completely safe, alone, inside, self-sufficient. That place was formed in childhood out of necessity, but it has become a spiritual home that also functions as a prison. Many spiritual traditions speak of the wilderness, the desert, the cave, periods of retreat that are necessary and holy. The problem is not that Lee retreats. The problem is that he never comes back with a message, a plan, a word. The wilderness is supposed to end in return. The spiritual invitation for Lee is not to stop retreating. It is to transform the retreat into something intentional, a place he goes deliberately to hear what God or the universe or his own deepest self is saying, and from which he returns with something to offer. The difference between hiding and praying, between disappearing and discerning. The capacity is already in him. It needs to be consciously redirected. Chapter 5. What the family saw and what they missed. A compassionate accounting. What the family saw: a quiet boy who was doing fine, a capable son who did not need as much managing as the others, a child who got himself busy and did not cause trouble, a young man who was responsible, who made it to America, who provides, a brother who fixes things, a husband who shows up in December, a person who seems a little distant sometimes, but who clearly loves his family. What the family missed: a boy who was reaching emotionally and not being met, who learned to stop reaching because the reach produced nothing, who developed a private inner world because the shared outer world had no consistent space for his feelings, who carried an invisible weight of not being enough, not being heard, not being seen in his full self, who became a man with no language for emotional experience because nobody gave him that language, who loves his wife and his family and has no reliable neurological pathway for showing it under pressure. These are not two different boys. They are the same boy, seen from the outside and from the inside respectively. The gap between these two views is where the wound lives, and it is that gap that the family now has the opportunity to close. What no one said that Lee needed to hear. What a parent could have said: "I see you over there being quiet and handling everything yourself. I know you are not asking for much. I want you to know that you can. You are not too much. What is going on inside you matters to me. Tell me something nobody else knows about what you are carrying." What a sibling could have said: "I know you are the one who always seems fine. I just want to check in, not because something is wrong, because I want to know what is actually going on with you. How are you actually doing?" What Gina tried to say and what Lee heard. What Gina said When are we going to have a plan? I need to know what is happening with my life. What Lee heard: you are failing me. You are not enough. I am losing patience with who you are. None of these are anyone's fault. They are the results of a system, a cultural framework, a generational inheritance, and a nervous system shaped by all of it. But they are also things that can change right now in this generation. Chapter 6: How We All Heal, the Family Prescription, Healing. Lee is not Lee's work alone. The wound was made in relationship, and it heals in relationship. What Lee must do for himself. Number 1, get into therapy. This is not optional anymore. Specifically, emotionally focused therapy or internal family systems therapy with a trauma-informed therapist who understands attachment wounds in men. The work he needs to do cannot be done alone and cannot be done only with Gina. He needs a professional, neutral space where his inner world is witnessed for possibly the first time in his life. Open Path Collective at openpathcollective.org offers accessible options. This is the single most important move on this list. Number 2, learn the language of his own emotional experience. Lee likely has a very limited vocabulary for what happens inside him emotionally. This is not stupidity. It is a direct result of never having been taught this language. The Feelings Wheel by Dr. Gloria Wilcox maps hundreds of emotional states from primary to nuanced. Journaling, voice noting his thoughts without sending them, simply practicing noticing what is happening in my body right now. What is the name for this? Emotional literacy is a skill. It can be learned at any age. Number 3, regulate his nervous system deliberately. The physiological sigh, double inhale through the nose, long exhale through the mouth 5 times, is the fastest evidence-based vagus nerve reset available. Lee should do this every morning before checking his phone, and specifically when he feels the shutdown coming before a difficult conversation. Cold water on the face slows the heart rate, interrupting sympathetic activation. Walking is one of the most effective cortisol clearance mechanisms available. 20 minutes of walking when the nervous system is overloaded. Number 4, name the shame to one safe person. The shame spiral only breaks when the shameful thing is spoken out loud to someone who does not reject you for it. Lee needs one safe person to whom he says out loud, I know the wait has been too long. I know I have not communicated well. I am ashamed of the gap between the husband I want to be and where I am. I am working on it. Speaking the shame out loud once to one safe person begins the neurological process of releasing it. Number 5, start giving small pieces of the plan now. He does not need the whole plan ready before he communicates. He needs to communicate whatever piece he has. Even, I do not have a date yet, but I am actively working on it. Imperfect communication from a man who is trying is received completely differently by a nervous system that has been living in silence. One small piece of the plan is not nothing. It is everything. What his parents can do. Number 1, have the conversation you never had. Not about what he is doing wrong in his marriage. The conversation about who he was as a boy and whether he felt heard. Something like, I have been thinking about when you were growing up. I wonder sometimes if you felt heard by us. I want to know, and I want to say that if you felt like you had to manage yourself alone, I am sorry. We did not know what we did not know, but I am asking now. Number 2, stop measuring him only by what he provides. The question of when is the rent paid? When is Gina coming? Are those obligations met? These questions are also, to Lee's nervous system, an ongoing evaluation of whether he is enough. Add different questions. How are you actually doing? Not the family update. You, what do you need that nobody is asking you about? Number 3, speak words of affirmation over him, specifically, not generic pride, specific witness. I see how hard you are working. I know this situation is not what you wanted for your marriage, and I know you are trying. I am proud not just of what you have achieved, but of who you are. These words, spoken directly, land in the nervous system as the attunement that was missing in childhood. What his siblings can do. Check in without agenda. Not, when is Gina coming? Just, how are you? And then actually wait for the answer. For a man who learned that nobody was coming, a sibling who simply shows up and asks and listens without an agenda is more healing than any advice. Share your own struggle first. Lee will not open up in a vacuum, but he will often open when someone he trusts goes first. A sibling who shares something real and difficult creates the permission structure for Lee to do the same. This is how trust works in people with avoidant attachment, not by being pushed open, by watching it be safe enough for someone else to open and deciding to follow. What Gina can do from this new understanding: reframe the silence. Lee's silence is not Lee leaving. His nervous system is in shutdown and the communication pathways are offline. Reframing it neurologically changes how Gina's own nervous system receives it. Instead of, he is going quiet because he does not care, try, his nervous system is overwhelmed, and he has retreated to the only safe place he knows. This does not mean she accepts the silence indefinitely. It means she stops interpreting it as evidence of his love for her. It is evidence of his wound. Those are different things. Use the vulnerability door, not the complaint door. When Gina needs connection or information, reaching through vulnerability opens the door that complaint closes. Not, why haven't you told me the plan? But, I am feeling really far away from you and I need to feel close. Lee's nervous system can receive vulnerability. It cannot receive criticism without shutting down. Working with this reality is not capitulating to it. It is the most strategic and loving thing available right now. Hold the line on couples therapy. Gina understanding Lee's wound does not mean Gina absorbs the consequences of it indefinitely. She holds the line clearly and lovingly. I love you. I understand so much more about where this comes from, and I need us to get professional help together because I cannot continue to manage this alone. That is not an ultimatum. That is a woman asking her husband to do this with her. That is not too much to ask. Chapter 7. The Integration. What changes from here? The truth Lee now gets to carry. Being dismissed as a boy was not evidence of his worth, it was evidence of the family's limitations at that time. His silence was the most intelligent response available to a child in that situation. It is no longer the most intelligent response available to a man with a wife, a child, a family who wants to know him, and tools he did not have then. He is allowed to come out. He is allowed to need things out loud. He is allowed to have an interior world that other people are invited into. The cocoon kept him safe for a season. It is time to build a home instead. The truth the family now gets to carry. They did not set out to overlook him. They did the best with what they had and knew how to do. The patterns that shaped Lee were handed to them by their own parents, who were handed them by theirs. The chain is not anyone's fault in the punitive sense, but it is everyone's responsibility to break it going forward. The family that learns to ask Lee how he is really doing, to speak words of specific witness over him, to stop measuring him only by what he provides. That family is not just healing Lee, they are healing themselves, and they are changing what their grandchildren and great-grandchildren inherit. The wound was made across generations. The healing is also a generational act. What this family does now echoes forward in ways they cannot fully see yet. One last thing. Lee is a man who went to America and built something, who shows up every December even though the flights are expensive and the visits are short and the reunion is always tinged with the pressure of everything unresolved. Who loves his child, who has never, as far as anyone can tell, stopped loving Gina even when he could not find the words or the plan or the courage to say so clearly. He is not the problem. He is a person in a problem that was built across decades by a system larger than him, by a culture that had not yet developed the tools to hold his particular kind of interior world. Those tools exist now, the science exists, the therapy exists, the language exists, the family is right now in the act of reading it. That is not nothing. That is the beginning. Lee does not need to become a different man. He needs to become a more fully seen version of the man he already is. And the people reading this document are, right now, doing the most important thing that has ever been done for him. They are finally looking in. He did not close because he stopped loving. He closed because nobody taught him it was safe to stay open. The family's job now is to make it safe. His job is to walk through the door. Both things have to happen. Both things can. We see you, Lee. We always did. We just did not know how to say it. We are saying it now. With love, Coach Jackie, XOXO. The Clarity Advantage, NITTI Framework. Compiled with love by Coach Jackie.